Hey everybody, in this presentation I'm going to go through the history of zines and sort of self-published ephemera, booklets, etc. So if we go way back hundreds of years, we have this historical figure, Martin Luther, um, who is distributing these self-published booklets, basically flyers, um, propaganda during the Reformation, arguing for a separation from the Catholic Church. So the way that Martin Luther is distributing these documents is not through the internet. He does not have like an Etsy store or anything. You know, he is literally standing like in the middle of a public square and distributing these by hand with himself, which is what gets him in trouble. Okay. But we can go, back hundreds of years to with the advent of the printing press, that sort of ability to make copies becomes very important for where we are now. And then a little further, or a little, not so far back, um, we go to Thomas Paine and the what I call OG Brexit, the original Brexit that's happened. And Thomas Paine has written this booklet basically called Common Sense about how the 13 colonies need to have independence from Great Britain. Um, this too, is getting him in trouble. But with the ability to make copies and to distribute these by hand, that helps spread those ideas. Okay. And then fast forwarding to the 1970s, which seems kind of long ago, but not too long now. We have punk rock and zine culture, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. So I mentioned this show in the last module, Too Fast to Live, Too Young to Die, punk graphics at the Cranbrook Art Museum. And in addition to these wonderful posters in this room, and I mean the entire like bottom floor was filled with all of these amazing works. In the tables in this room that you can see that kind of like are arranged around the perimeter were all of these original zines and like flyers for posters that people had made and self-published, self-distributed. So there's really a lot of power when it comes to self-publishing and self-distributing, not having a financial backer behind you that's dictating what you can and can't publish, and really utilizing zines and these limited edition copies to advertise new bands, new ideas, new sort of aspects of the counterculture in society. And you can see this one on the right is 25 cents a copy. So zines are a way to kind of spread counterculture, what might be considered against the norm or niche. And in the 80s and 90s, we have queercore and the Riot Girl movements, sort of feminist underground movements whose ideas are being spread through printed matter. That's pretty cool. And in the late 90s, we have, the internet is starting to become more widely accessible, especially with platforms like LiveJournal and MySpace. You all are probably too young to remember LiveJournal, but LiveJournal is what it sounds like, or was what it sounds like, where you went to the LiveJournal site, you had your own account, and you could just basically write a public diary entry and sort of chronicle your life that way. I never had a LiveJournal account, but I knew plenty of people that did. You could also meet people through LiveJournal and MySpace, and it was a way to kind of find your people outside of just like the normal everyday realm that you're physically existing in. this article, which I'm going to post this entire presentation as a PDF as well so you can access the links, talks about why the internet hasn't killed zines. If anything, it's made zine culture stronger in that you can use the internet to sell zines and sort of have this wider distribution of ideas and content, which is pretty cool. And this is an animated GIF from this article. There are some great books about zines and sort of underground comics, mini comics. I believe that we have both of these in the Hoover Library, behind the Zines Self-Publishing Culture. And what you mean, what's a zine? Zines can be about anything. And again, that comes from the power of self-distribution, self-publishing. You don't have to restrict yourself in terms of the ideas that you are presenting. You have this freedom of speech. And then for this project too, and going through the PDF, again, you can access the links. Each of these images, you can see I can like hover over it, is linked to the artist's site. We have some inspirational photographers just related to your zine assignment, the content that you should be thinking about. This is Catherine Opie, who's a very famous contemporary photographer and has a whole series of ice houses, these like ice fishing houses that they're very colorful, but they sit on this very white, neutral landscape. She takes these photographs from a distance. So there's a very prominent horizon line. You can see the horizon line is kind of in the center of the composition in this photograph. And from a distance, it just looks like these blocks of colors on this white page. And then when you get closer, you start to see the details that like, oh, people actually build these so they can fish in the winter in Minnesota and some other cold states. This is Ed Ruscha, who's a very famous contemporary artist, has a book called 26 Gasoline Stations, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Photographs of 26 gasoline stations taken during a road trip across the country. So what is interesting when you are looking through the book is that you see a change in landscape happen, and you see a change in gasoline station brands that are available depending on where he is in the landscape. So this kind of visual documentation of an actual journey that he took across the country, which I love this series. This is James Singwald. He's a Baltimore-based photographer who his goal is capturing Baltimore block by block. So he works with a very old style of camera and takes these images of nearly abandoned blocks in Baltimore, and has been doing this for almost 10 years now, and sort of trying to document every single part of Baltimore City, documenting gentrification that's happening and that's displacing many citizens, especially in West Baltimore. And this is Bernd and Hilda Becker, who were collaborators, husband and wife team. And one of their most famous series of work is they took photos of water towers all across Europe. And you can see that the way the photographs are taken, the water towers take up a lot of space in each composition. When arranged in a grid, when you see multiples, you can see that they were very careful about where they took the photo in terms of how much space that water tower was going to take up in the image. They were very consistent and considered, which is great. Black and white photography, this is pre-digital. And we get this sense because we aren't seeing any humans of this kind of like almost post-industrial wasteland, especially seeing some of these water towers rusting out, and just really gets us to think about these man-made objects that are built to support a human need like water. So there are some artists for you to look into when creating your own zine and trying to figure out what you are going to photograph for this project.